Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. Trying a little bit different format today as I record my introduction. I just had this fantastic interview with Akshay Bhargava, and he's the Chief Product Officer at Malwarebytes. I've always had a great luck and success with Malwarebytes as a product. My teams have been using it for years. And Akshay we talk about purpose in this conversation a lot. Purpose-built products, purpose-built software, purpose-built products that help prevent malware. They envision a world where malware doesn't exist, and they want to be the solution provider to take care of that and to help businesses and help individuals. And it's really interesting to talk to Akshay because he leads the product organization, guides all research and development activities, and drives the company's vision and strategy roadmap. And so it's a very important position for product companies like Malwarebytes. And he previously served as vice president of Oracle's Cloud Business Group and was a significant executive at FireEye as well, running many of their product lines before that company went public, and was a management consultant at McKinsey. He's also a board advisor to several tech startups and was named to the Software Report's top 25 software executives for 2020. That's a fun, go check that website out. I'm going to put links in the show notes to it where you can look. He's a thought leader, and he writes. He's an amazing writer, and he writes for the Forbes Technology Council and is a frequent speaker at industry events. And he holds a BS in computer science at Carnegie Mellon and an MBA with the at MIT. And I'm going to put on the show notes page, you're going to find links to find him on LinkedIn. You got to go to LinkedIn to check him out. He's built this purpose-built framework that he's been talking about. And whether or not you are a software person or you're building products, physical or digital products, it doesn't matter. He's clearly using this to build Malwarebytes strategy, but it's a purpose-built framework for innovation is what he writes about. And it's really, really cool. And one of the big things that he's doing is going for removing luck from the innovation process. And I've never heard it talked about in this way before, but how to use a purpose-built framework of innovation to remove luck from the process. And which all of us hate with innovation. How do you know it's going to be successful, and what are the ways to build higher likelihoods of success? We talk about this a lot, and aligning also customer pain and solving customer pain issues versus just responding to a request for a feature request. So he talks about empathy and developing products that solve customer pain points versus just random requests for feature requests from sales or from wherever it may come from. And then how do you prioritize and choose what to do and what not to do in a complex world with infinite choice? And we also talk about mindfulness and taking a Zen approach to security, which I also liken that to an 80-20 principle. And as a longtime meditation practitioner and mindfulness practitioner, I am, and he is as well. It's guiding in the security world instead of layering complexity on top of complexity. How do you create elegant products that do a bang-up job for users and for customers, but they don't have there's an attempt made to strip away the complexity to make it actually useful instead of causing more problems. So that's my introduction to Akshay, and I want to welcome you to this really interesting, fun conversation with Akshay Bhargava. So Akshay, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on because I've been in the technology industry for a long, long time, and the company you're currently with, Malwarebytes, has been one of the early technologies that we were involved in. But I'd love to, before we talk about Malwarebytes, I really want to hear from you about your story of success, and we can take it back as far as you'd like. I was just looking at, we went, maybe you can talk about where you started and how, what got you to this point today.
Would love to. So my background is I'm a computer scientist by training. So I did my undergrad in computer science. And then I spent a number of years as a software developer and an engineering manager. And then I was fortunate enough to go to business school. And what sparked my interest in business school was really a passion for understanding more about the customer and the business and economics of technology. So in business school, I was fortunate to go to MIT Sloan, which is a school that I really admire because not only because it's my alma mater, but also because of the principles that it stands behind. And it really wants to build leaders that are humble, that are hungry, and that want to have positive impact in the world. So while I was at MIT, I happened to stumble in two areas. One is entrepreneurship, and the other is I had an internship at McKinsey & Company, where I got a chance to do management consulting and meet some phenomenal executives. So and this is really where my passion for cloud and cybersecurity started, was at MIT and at McKinsey. So while I was at McKinsey, I would talk to a lot of boards and CEOs, and two topics kept coming up. Number one, what is this cloud thing and how should we take advantage of it? And number two, why are these attackers after us and what do I need to do to protect myself and my company and organization from them? So it became kind of a natural theme I kept hearing. And it was one that I started to develop some expertise in because I started advising customers on this and clients on this topic. So from there, my journey as a product leader.
Can I ask you a question about MIT?
Of course.
So you won a big competition there. You won a $100,000 competition, or maybe I'd love for you to tell that story.
Oh yes, this was actually one of the highlights of my time at MIT. So there's a famous competition called the MIT 100K, and it's an entrepreneurship competition and it's not limited to people from MIT. It's a global competition, but MIT hosts it and also provides awards. But in that competition, I was fortunate to be part of a team, and that team, we proposed a company called Cyber Analytics, which was really focused on addressing APTs, advanced persistent threats,
sure,
and kind of utilizing an innovative technology from one of the labs that MIT had licensed to. So this was kind of a business model around this really compelling technology called attack wraps and how we could use it to detect and prevent APTs. So we submitted this idea into the 100K. My team, there's 5 of us total in the team. And we won the web/IT track for this submission. So yes, it was a great experience.
That's quite impressive because I'm from the Boston area, and of course, MIT is well known. So I found that fun to read about on your when I was doing some research about you. And then, but I don't want to get in the way of your good story. So then, what happened next after MIT? Was that where'd you land next?
MIT, I landed at McKinsey. Okay. And McKinsey, I was consulting with a lot of Fortune 1000 companies, from a IT perspective, and also a lot of technology companies serving the CEO and boards. And two themes kept coming up: cloud and cybersecurity. So I started building some expertise in that. And from there, it became a logical extension to my career when I decided to leave McKinsey for personal reasons, largely because the travel was becoming quite excessive. I decided to go and work for a company called FireEye. FireEye is a company in the cybersecurity space. I joined them pre-IPO. There were about 350 people at the time. And it was a terrific run. The company IPO'd, and I was responsible for one product and eventually for 10 of them through organic and inorganic growth. It was really a phenomenal rocket ship. So that was a great experience. And that led me to Oracle, where I worked in the Oracle Cloud Business Group as an executive. And then from there, I went to Malwarebytes as where I'm currently the chief product officer.
So did you ever get a chance to meet Larry Ellison?
I have met Larry Ellison, and I've been in meetings with him. Yes, and that's an experience in itself.
So you won a robot competition at Carnegie Mellon. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, that kind of dates me back. That was in my undergrad, and I think that was my first time in life winning something. So yes, it still held a very special place in my heart. So the thing is, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, the reason I chose to go to Carnegie Mellon is, I did all of these different tours of universities. And when I went to Carnegie Mellon and I walked in Wien Hall, I saw all these robots walking around. And for some reason, I just said, this just feels like home. I love this place. I love robots. I love computer science. It's just this, have this mystique to it. By no means is the building beautiful. I mean, it's a pretty dingy, old, rundown building, but at least when I was there, I'm sure it's much better now. But the glamour of like all this, you're just surrounded with this tech. And so as I saw these really advanced robotics, there was a robot competition. It was a pretty well-defined robot competition where, robots would race and they had to do certain things. And so we designed a small mini robot that had to maneuver through a race and compete and try to win and get to the other side. So my partner and I, we created a robot, and we're lucky that we snuck by and won that thing.
I love that. It stuck out for me because I've been going to Singularity University for many years. I think I got involved really in 2015, and they send executives out to, it's right in the Bay Area. And so they run groups of executives through this kind of exposure to all these exponential technologies. And of course, as an executive, you're like not always touching outside of your own domains of technologies like in healthcare, robotics, or AI, or space travel. So when you get exposed to all of this, and the robot, they had a robot competition, and sort of we had to build as a team these robots. And I'm not a scientist or any of that, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun doing that.
It is a lot of we had a lot of fun, and it was we had a big group of people cheering over there, and the robots would collide, and all kinds of interesting things happened. So it was definitely more than the award, the experience of just being part of that is was something very memorable.
Now, what are your thoughts on since you have some understanding of Oracle, and I think they're like the sleeping, not a sleeping giant. That's probably not the right. They're already a giant, but their cloud, their PaaS, and their IaaS product lines that you were involved in. It was super interesting to me to see TikTok. That was the platform that was like approved. So there's something going on there, and I don't know what it is because we're more on the Microsoft AWS side of the fence. But what are your thoughts on that of why Oracle was chosen?
I think one of the things is there are two things. I think one is Oracle, given how big the opportunity of cloud is, if you're a big tech company, you cannot afford not to be in that space. So I think it's just kind of, in some sense, it is table stakes. Like a big company like Oracle or SAP, if they want to stay relevant in the next phase of technology, they need to have a strong presence in cloud.
Okay. And
so I think that's number one, is just looking at the market trends, looking at the economics. Now, Oracle's take to cloud, at least while I was there, was going to, they did want to be a differentiated player, not just a me too. And a big part of their push there was really how they're building out their infrastructure as a service, the bare metal offerings, combined with the fact that they have a very strong software as a service layer. So their idea of cloud was very much to be holistic, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, data as a service, which they're very good at with the database origins, and software as a service, all integrated. And the second thing that they wanted to do was also help customers manage on-prem and cloud. And the management and security of kind of this hybrid environment, multi-cloud hybrid environment, was something that Oracle believes that they can excel at. So having a complete cloud stack plus security management to help with the hybrid multi-cloud deployment was the angle that Oracle was taking. And given their customer base, that made a lot of sense because many of their customers are not the first adopters to cloud. They're really trying to find a way to move from on-prem to cloud. And Oracle could be, is very well positioned to be a partner to that for them to help them do that.
You you put a very significant business line together there, right? While you were there?
That's right. That's right. There were two. So my role there was twofold. One is to create a business line, but the other was to help differentiate Oracle Cloud from the competition. And really the differentiation came from the completeness, software as a service, all the way to infrastructure as a service, and the security management.
Okay.
So the business lines that I created were also in security and management. So it was both a differentiator for Oracle Cloud as a whole, but also an opportunity to launch the first cloud services for security and management.
Okay.
So these included some things like, Oracle's identity as a service offering. We also had an offering called Identity SOC for security operations centers. That tied together identity, cloud access security broker, data security, all of the things together, and management and SIM. So that was really some of the work that I did, and we did grow that to be one of the fastest growth areas within platform as a service for Oracle.
That's fascinating. So that's wonderful. And so then now you're at Malwarebytes. And what I think probably the question is, what are you not in charge of? Not what are you in charge of? But maybe a lot of people know Malwarebytes, but maybe you can talk about what your role is there. And then I have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the Chief Product Officer at Malwarebytes, and it's such an honor because I get to work on something that I'm so passionate about, which is products and innovation. And so in that role, I'm responsible for a couple of things. Number one is defining what are the products we want to build. So kind of the product strategy, making sure that we execute and deliver those products. And also how do we price and package those products? How do we take them to market? And then the third piece I would say is a lot of the, and also, by the way, I should say, part of building the products, our key differentiation is our design. So how we design our products to be uniquely differentiated in the market is another aspect. And then how do we take those products to market? So a lot of the things that the go-to-market aspects of that are also things that I look after in the operational elements to make sure we succeed in the market. So that's kind of at a nutshell, all the things, looking at products end to end.
No, it's fantastic. I've had the product officer, and I don't think necessarily, and I've been a little bit of an eye-opener to see how powerful the product officers are within software companies. And unless you're in the Bay Area or know that industry really well, I've had SonicWall's product officers on and several. And what I really wanted to ask you is, because the innovation required for security these days is quite stunning. It's like trying to change the tires in a moving car. It's a challenge. And I'd love to, maybe we could talk about your framework for how you go about doing that in a fairly complex world, how you kind of break it and organize teams towards an objective.
Great question. And one that I think, Bill, one of the things that when I look at innovation, and part of the reason I built something that I call the purpose-built innovation framework is because I've noticed that innovation is something that a lot of companies struggle to make repeatable. Sometimes companies have one product success, and they mistake that. I love, I don't know how many listeners have read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Sure.
It's a terrific book. I highly recommend it, about behavioral psychology. But some of those aspects apply also to products and innovation. And a lot of successful products, they mistake the role that skill and luck might play in developing those products. And this is something that's a passion of mine, is because I want to build innovative products, but I also want to make sure that they're successful every time. And you need to extract out the element of luck from skill in making this repeatable. So that's one of the areas that's a passion of mine. And going back to your question, Bill, is as part of that framework, you need to think about not only what are the steps that are needed, but also how do you organize the team? How do you structure the processes? How do you make sure that you get, deeply understand the customer's pain points and problems? Because that's really where I think a lot of the innovation starts from. So all of those aspects are things that I've tried to encompass in my framework.
So I've never heard it talked about that way, of breaking out skill and luck out of it. Would one way to break apart skill and luck is to have more tests, so you're testing more frequently and spending less money on before you go fully to market?
That's absolutely one of the aspects of it is,
okay.
And what I typically call experimentation. But it's kind of this, in order to have a very strong innovation culture and capability, you need to have the ability to, test rapidly, fail fast, iterate. And that's part of the mechanism where by the time you put it into the product pipeline, you have a high confidence in its ability to succeed. So that's definitely part of the framework.
So is the high confidence in the success can you make a security product that works, but still is not accepted by the customer because maybe they don't realize the value of it? Like, I'm just wondering how you would approach a successful product, but the customer doesn't know that they don't, like APTs. You mentioned APTs earlier.
Yeah.
APT was a topic. I remember leaving RSA one year. And the market I'm in is like 100 to 5,000 users. So it's like mid-market. So as you know, RSA is just all the big boys, big Fortune 100s. Yeah. So they're all talking about APTs, but then I come back to talk about APTs and I might as well be clanging a gong in the middle of the pandemic at a shopping mall. Nobody's listening. And so how do you avoid that effect of nobody's listening, but it's the right security approach?
Yeah. And this is where, I'll cite a reference here. By the way, I love reading, so I get a lot of inspiration from what I read. A great analogy to this is, for those of you who may have heard of the book, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. In that, he talks a lot about, what's your purpose as an organization, and do you understand the time frame of the game you're playing? If you're playing an infinite game where your purpose is to help customers, address the most relevant, and impactful threats, well, then that guides your purpose and what you need to do. And eventually you find the right way to market and tell the story, but your purpose guides you to that. Okay. And so I think even for me, when I was working on APTs at FireEye, a lot of customers will say, well, APTs, that's for the big companies. That's not for us, right? Like, why would someone want to target us as APTs? But I think when you have a very clear sense of purpose, that we want to protect you from, the most impactful, most modern threats, then people start to understand, okay, what are these APTs and why should I care? And you can start finding the right ways to relate to them. And I can give you so many great examples. Of course, analogies also help. Once attacks happen, customers could understand. Having the threat intelligence helps. But being able to weave that really compelling story, why you should care as a customer, is really the difference between just kind of saying APT versus let me tell you a story about why you should care.
Oh, pause that for 1 second. You're a book guy, and I know that, and so am I. We were talking about libraries. So this book, Range, have you read it?
I have not read it. It's on my list.
Okay, but he talks about the power. So it's how specialists triumph. Sorry, that was wrong. How generalists triumph in a specialized world. In breadth, how breadth is going to win, and not just narrow deep dives, but trying to find patterns across. Absolutely. And so, but he talks about analogies. And so your point about analogies and storytelling makes quite a bit of sense. But what I haven't heard before, which I thought was really cool, is you just mentioned about purpose. Your storytelling really around the purpose, not trying to chase everything that's happening.
And the thing I love, by the way, Range, I just want to talk about that for a second, because I haven't read the book, but I did listen to a podcast with the author. And my biggest takeaway from that was the way I want to raise my child was very different, just listening to that podcast, because he uses the examples of athletes, right? And how athletes who do tremendously well in a certain sport, many of them actually come from having played many sports. And so you learned different skill sets, and this also ties to innovation. You learn different skill sets in different contexts, which when you apply it in a different context or a different sport, you become innovative in that sport. You become distinctive in that sport.
Sure.
The same thing applies to, industries, verticals, customer segments, and applying innovation from one segment to another. One trend in particular I talk about in cybersecurity, Bill, is what I call consumerization of IT. And because I have such a passion for design, we've designed consumer products that are very easy to use, very elegant, very slick. And what we found is a lot of people said, hey, customers in the enterprise, they don't care about ease of use. They don't care about compelling UI and all of the other things that the consumer cares about. Well, actually, those pundits in the past, they were wrong. Because what I'm finding is customers do care about ease of use, ease of search, ease of ability to correlate things really rapidly. And so that's an example of applying range in cybersecurity and at Malwarebytes.
Well, it also, you and I got connected by this really unique article you wrote about the Zen of Cyber Security. And I'm not getting the title 100% correct, but that to me, being a longtime mindfulness and practitioner and meditator, I thought I talk a lot about the 80-20 principle and Pareto's principle, and my CTO just, we tried like heck to get people to focus on the critical 20% instead of trying to boil the ocean. And so it's really interesting, your approach, because it is super complex. And if you're in the product side and you're trying to design innovation, but with simplicity and design aesthetics in mind, then an ease of use, that's very different than adding complexity on top of complexity.
Correct. And I love, this is a topic I also practice meditation. So the topic that I really resonated with is reaching Zen in cybersecurity. And if you take a step back, one of the things I hear from so many security professionals today is they're inundated with alerts. There's no shortage of alerts to look at. So they have so much, and there's no shortage of tools. They're inundated with more and more growing number of tools and more management consoles. And it also reminded me of the behavioral psychology that we learn. Is one of the things that's a well-known fact is, people, when you multitask, you're actually not more productive. But in the mind, it feels like you're more productive because every time you finish something or accomplish something, put a check mark, it releases dopamine in the body. And that's a feel-good factor. So even though sometimes you multitask, you might not be as productive, but you may feel like you're more productive, right? And there's science behind this. And one of the things that I realized is in cybersecurity, it's very easy to just say, I'm going to look at these hundreds of alerts, right? Whereas having a Zen approach to it is actually being much more mindful and being more purposeful and picking the right alerts to look at and really focusing on those and how to reduce your attack surface also, rather than just have a really big attack surface and keep, looking at alerts in cloud versus, my firewall rules versus this versus that. So that's really what inspired me to write about this topic.
So, I think it's the vendors over the past 7 years have really, it's been an arms race. And I think now we're sort of taking a step back, or at least I hope we're all taking a step back and looking, okay, we've got enough stuff. Now we got to pull it back together and come up with something that human beings can really operate, and we can leverage these helper technologies like AI and machine learning to really help us instead of making these systems unusable because they're too confused.
Right. You're spot on. So
as far as what you're designing for, back to your framework approach, how when you take a step back and you look at the market and your purpose with your organization and your team's purpose, how are you organizing for the future? Like how does your framework guide you right now?
Yeah, so I think the first thing where the framework helps to guide is I don't listen to feature requests. I always try, number one, and this is a golden rule that I train all of our product managers on, is if somebody comes, it's very easy for sales or a customer or even the board to say, hey, I'll tell you what, here's a feature you should build. That shows a lack of understanding of the most important thing. And for me, the most important thing is step it back to the customer.
Okay.
The customer has a problem. The customer has a pain point. And so you need to go and empathize, not with the feature, but you need to empathize with the customer and understand what is the customer's pain point. Only then you'll be able to know whether that feature is the best way to solve that pain point. If you start with the feature, you'll never be able to be truly innovative, because to be truly innovative, and the master of this is, I think Steve Jobs was a natural at this, right? Because he would say, I can understand the customer pain point so well that I can articulate it better than even the customer can. But this is what true customer empathy is when you can deeply understand the customer situation, the customer's problem. Then you're not limited by a single feature that a competitor built or a single feature that someone can think of. Now you can experiment many, many different ways to find the optimal way to solve that customer problem. So that's really where I start the framework. And I call this customer empathy, because it is really being able to put yourself in the customer's shoes. A great product manager has to be able to do that.
So how do you organize this through thousands and thousands of customers? Do you have how would you start gathering the data points?
Yeah, so I think that there's, and by the way, doing this, there's no one answer to this, because based on the vertical, based on the segment, the approach has to be nuanced. So for example, if you're building a product for consumers, it's really hard to sit with millions of consumers, right? Like, it's just not practical. And your target customer base is that. If you're serving customers in the Fortune 500, it's easier to talk to a handful of customers and start to get a viewpoint of what those customers care about. So understanding the segment and understanding the vertical is also important. Strategy needs to be nuanced for that. But let me give you some concrete examples of things we're doing that help across various segments. With consumers, one of the things that we find really impactful is doing experimentation, A/B testing, and surveys. Those type of tools work really well with when you have a larger population of customers. In the large enterprise, having customer advisory boards, having a lot more one-on-one discussions, and identifying who are the thought leaders in those spaces is a very effective way to deeply empathize with customers. And doing shadow programs, ride-alongs with a few of those big customers helps a lot. So those are just examples, but fundamentally, I always try to balance the approach with both quantitative and qualitative insights. So quantitative insights can come through surveys and other things where you can poll a large group of customers or prospects. And then qualitative insights come from talking to a handful of customers in that segment or users in that segment, and understanding really the why behind some of the things you learn in your surveys.
Okay, and then knowing a little bit about Jobs, as I know you do as well, when he came in, didn't he can like 80% of the products? He just said, no, we're not using these products anymore, and just focused on a couple. Is that even possible for working at a company to come in today and do that?
I think it is challenging to do, but maybe it's the right thing that a lot of companies need to do. I remember the story about, Andy Grove at Intel, and they're debating about whether they should get rid of something or double down on something. And then his response was, you know what, if you and I were not at this company and we're coming in brand new day one, what would we do? And, would we create something new? Would we kill something? And he said, and the person he was talking to, I think it's the chief architect, said, oh, undeniably, we would do this. He said, okay, I have an idea. Let's go downstairs. And he takes them outside and said, we're walking in new now. We're the new guys, okay? And now let's go make that decision. And this is part of the thing that makes this decision-making tough, is that, it's very hard to, there's always some customers that say, hey, this product is good enough. There's always some champions in the company who like that product. So it's hard to rationalize a product portfolio.
Yeah.
Even at Malwarebytes, we've made that tough decision to kill a product. And it's the right thing for the company. It's the right thing for the customers in the long term, but in the short term, it creates some pain. And this is why to do it effectively, you need someone who is truly a visionary, who can see the long term and help bring customers to the long term and endure some short-term pain.
Well, see, that's your point. And by the way, I have another, you just asked a great question. And this is one of my favorite most questions are the answer. And it's funny because you just asked, it's like, and with innovation, it's like sometimes the most powerful question is more than it's the right answer. It's, are we asking ourselves the right questions?
Totally. And I think as I've matured in my career, and now that as an executive, the most important value that I think I can add to the company and organization is make sure that we're asking the right questions, right? And so this is fundamental. Like, do we deeply, and I think also, starting with why and understanding why as a really powerful question. I think those are two things where often we pass these points. It's very easy, even going back to the customer empathy example, it's very easy to say, we should build this feature without asking why, right? And sometimes the why, the answer you get to the why is not good enough. Why? Because competitor does it. Why? Because this salesperson said we should do it. Why? Because this customer said, still not good enough. Tell me the customer pain point, then that's a good why for me. If you tell me customers have this pain point, and I believe that the optimal way to solve that pain point is this feature, then I say, okay, now that makes sense to me, right? But until I don't understand, that correlation going back all the way to the customer, the answer is not good enough.
I'm still intrigued with your purpose statement before, and how does purpose guide that last statement you just made about like a feature request or a customer pain point? Because I'm looking at those as sort of two separate things. And then how would the purpose line up with that in your mind?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think purpose is one of those things that elevates beyond product, right? Product, you can say customer pain point, let's build it in the product as a way to solve it. Purpose is a level above. Purpose really needs to be at a company level. Okay. I really think, it trickles down into every employee, into every product decision, and a lot of other things. But purpose has to be at a higher level. And so purpose is, why do we exist? Why do we come to work every day, right? If the answer is we come to work every day to build products, that's not the real purpose. There needs to be a deeper purpose. And for me at Malwarebytes, why do we come to work every day at Malwarebytes? Because we view a world that's free of malware, right? And that's, where we can make sure that whether you're a consumer, whether you're a company, the stress and having to think about threats, we can take that away from you, right? That's our purpose, is to give you the ability to be and the freedom to not have to think about, cyber threats.
Would purpose for you be synonymous with vision or synonymous with mission?
Great. So I think purpose is actually the core that drives both of those.
Okay.
Vision and mission so we have a purpose and you have a vision of what the future world looks like. It's usually informed by your purpose. And then mission becomes the vehicle of how you get there. So purpose, vision, mission, they all tie in very closely together. It's like two legs of the same stool.
Yeah, someone had these are interesting conversations, because in the innovation world, people talk about MTPs, like a massive transformative purpose and vision. And someone said, well, a vision is possibly unachievable in this lifetime, meaning that it's a horizon that keeps moving. You never achieve it because it's aspirational. It's a verb. Right. It's a verb, or it's a moving target, but it's aspirational. And so I was super curious how you laid in the purpose, because I get it, but it makes sense the way you explained it.
Good. And I think, yes, sometimes, vision, mission, purpose can sometimes be overloaded terms, meaning people might imply different things by them by just using those terms. So it is always good to clearly define what you mean by each of those terms. So yes, I agree.
So you're certainly a master of complexity, of understanding complexity, but then designing to reduce and help customers with this complex world. Because if you can essentially, what I'm very interested these days is as businesses start to use on-prem cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, whatever hosting facilities, they've got a lot of choices and many people are sprawled. And so by definition, that's complexity. And how do you look at that? And now as a security company, you're designing products for multiple contingencies and then multiple platforms. So how do you approach that from your perspective, and how do you design for the future with that reality?
Yes, and I think this going back to my innovation framework, this actually ties in very nicely with something I talked about, which is prioritization. Because at some point, the good news is for most companies, and Malwarebytes being no exception here, the number of ideas, the number of things you can do is unbounded. There's always more things you can do than you have time to do. So a critical part of the success of whether it's your security approach, whether it's your product strategy, is what you choose to do. And increasingly, what you choose not to do. Because oftentimes there's more things you choose not to do than things you choose to do, just because of the sheer volume of things. So this is where, once you understand purpose and, mission, vision, once you understand your North Star, then it becomes much easier to help drive how to prioritize things to do. And this is something that, even at Malwarebytes, we do a very, very effective job. We say, hey, what are the set of things that are core to us that we need to build? What are things that we can, partner? What are things we can buy? And so defining very clearly what are things that we need to build because they're so core to our purpose and to our vision, that helps inform the priority. And there's other aspects of how you prioritize things. I mean, for us, looking at ROI is another thing. I mean, at the end of the day, we are a corporation. So optimizing for our stakeholders, optimizing for, revenue growth, and customer pain points, all of those things come into the mix, right? All the stakeholders, the aligning with the North Star, what the return on investment could be for this idea. All those things come into this kind of magic box. You shake it, and then you get a prioritization of things you need to do.
So it really does become, for an 80-20 analysis of what's the 20% of these ideas, metaphorically speaking, that we're going to build ourselves, partner, or buy our way in. So,
yeah. And I think the 80-20 Pareto is absolutely right here. Is, at an order of magnitude, you're going to have 100 ideas, of which you're only going to have the capacity to do on the order of 20. So that prioritization, but at the same time, those 20% of ideas should, if you pick the right ones, should deliver even more than 80% of the potential impact. So that's really why I think using the Pareto analogy is a good one here.
So I know you're a fan of Nassim Taleb's book, Anti-Fragile, and you've written about it, I know, in Dark Reading, and you mentioned it on a list of executive books you like. How do you for those who don't know the book Anti-Fragile, how does that influencing some of the work you're doing now?
Yeah, so this is great. And I think, especially for the security professional, I really encourage them to look at this book, Anti-Fragile. The thing is, the premise of the book is simple in a way, is that, look, we always think about what's the opposite of delicate is something that's strong. So if you ship something, and you say, hey, it's delicate, in turbulence, it'll break. But if you ship it, what's the opposite of that? Well, the opposite that most people think is if you ship something and it has a lot of turbulence, it doesn't break. But doesn't break and breaks are not opposites. Actually, the opposite is not that it doesn't break, it actually becomes stronger. So you put in turbulence and it becomes stronger. And that is really the concept of anti-fragile, is when you put it into turbulence, whatever it is that you put, it comes out stronger. Now, people say, okay, what are analogies of this? Well, the good news is we're surrounded with analogies of anti-fragility. And the human body is a great example. Nature is a great example. For example, for any of those people out there who like to do strength training, lift weights, what happens is, on one day you can lift 30 pounds and that's your max. The next day you can do 35. And the same person who used to only be able to lift 30 pounds, one day can lift 150 pounds.
Sure.
That person could not have lifted 150 pounds the first day they started. So this is an example where the body, the human body, is anti-fragile. You apply stress to it, it becomes stronger over time. So how do we apply these concepts to cybersecurity? And that's really what I talk about in my dark reading article, Failing Towards Zero, which is, a lot of times people think, hey, we had a cyber attack, or we had a data breach, or we had something. Wow, that must have made us weaker, right? And then that compromised our security posture. But having lots of small failures can actually help you become anti-fragile. As long as you learn from them and you apply them so that you don't keep falling for the same tactic, it can make you anti-fragile and you become stronger and you have a stronger security posture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you've read Kevin Kelly's work as well, which I read his book many years ago. I forget the name of it now. It was one of his earlier ones, and he talked about this concept of the immune system and the biological response, I think what's interesting with our networks is that ultimately with vendors like yourselves, that as you develop products, they're going to become more self-aware of the global network. And so like the human body, when I cut my finger, I don't ask my finger for permission to inoculate it. It's like it just auto deploys defense. And if I break it and I got to go to the hospital, I got to get it set, but there's an automation that heals it. And then there's some amount of pressure that I have to apply with the doctor to get reset it and such. So it's interesting, kind of the analogy with our bodies. It's a lot of it's automated, but still, if we get in a real wreck or really sick, we got to go triage. So it's interesting how this is happening and how maybe some of these strength over time, maybe avoiding some of the bigger problems with an enterprise. But like, just as you're saying, the anti-fragile, some of the smaller challenges that they build strength and maturity over time, which builds that larger capability to be secure.
And Bill, this is an unprecedented time. We're all living through a global pandemic. So this is also one of those times where both individuals as well as organizations have an opportunity to practice anti-fragility. Some of the companies that are thriving in today's time are the ones that have built some anti-fragility from a global pandemic. And so if you look in the stock market, there's some companies that have thrived in this global pandemic because chaos actually helped. This new way of working has helped them become even stronger and accelerated trends that they're playing on. So I do think that this pandemic, and I've written about this also, is how the pandemic has created this unique opportunity where to practice anti-fragility.
So as we wrap up, actually, I wanted to just ask you: is there anything in particular that popped in your head as we were talking that you're hoping I'd bring up, or that you wanted to go deeper in as we wrap up our conversation today?
I think we covered a lot, Bill. I think the only thing I would say is that, for those interested, I think, the innovation framework, purpose-built innovation is, what motivated me to put that together is really this drive that I have, that companies that succeed and individuals that succeed, it becomes really hard to disaggregate the reasons why success happens. And to make that repeatable is something that I'm really passionate about and something that I'm working on. So if anybody wants, please check that out. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I've put a lot of posts on kind of the framework and the parts. Starting with customer empathy, we talked about that. Talk about experimentation, talk about prioritization, so that by the time you get to the product pipeline, you have a high confidence that the idea that you're working on is going to be successful. And that's really what is a passion of mine. And it's one that I think has many applications, not just to product development, but also how you approach process change, how you approach, building your cybersecurity posture. So I think the applications are multifold, not just product innovation.
And essentially you're really trying to take the luck out of the unique lucky scenarios out, so you can develop more predictability to your innovation capabilities and what comes out the back end from the front end ideas.
That's exactly right. And one of the big biases that humans are wired to, with, if you read the books that I mentioned earlier, is that it's very hard to know when you have a successful product, what were the things that we did right from a process and execution and customer empathy standpoint, and what were the elements of luck? And luck can take many forms. Luck is we built the right product, we had the right timing, the customers were going through a pandemic, right? That helped create the right environment for success. So disaggregating what are the things we did right versus what are the luck factors, and then being able to amplify the skills so that the next time you build something new, you have a higher probability of success. That's really what my drive is. And now at Malwarebytes, we've been very fortunate. We've built, using this framework, we've built products for the consumer, like our privacy offering. We've built products for the small, medium business, like endpoint detection response. We've built products for managed service providers. We built products for large enterprise. And in all those 4 categories, there are a lot of different dynamics, different competition, different requirements. But we have been very successful with 4 new product offerings in each of those categories. So that gives me confidence that when you apply this framework, you have a better chance of success than just trying to rinse and repeat whatever worked for you previously, because there'll be a lot of elements you can't control.
Yeah, because something that a managed service provider is really under the hood could be trying to solve the same problem as what you're trying to do with someone's small office or their work right. From home. But then you're building, they're going to need different dashboards, different way of looking at data, different way of looking at multiple sets of customers versus someone at home. They just need to know, hey, here's my machine. Can I get it back to a fresh state again that's safe?
That's exactly right. And there's different, if you're an MSP, the types of products and solutions that you're going to look at are very different than if you're a consumer or small business. There's certain products that are built and designed to help an MSP, for example, manage thousands of their customers, or what we often refer in our product sites. So MSP has hundreds of thousands of customers that they're servicing. So they need different tools and technologies to manage across that, how they do billing, how they do licensing, how they aggregate and do reporting across those customers. Very, very different than if you're a consumer deploying it on one computer, right?
Wow. Well, Akshay, this has been great. And I think it's going to be fun for security professionals and IT leaders to really kind of see how you're guiding the ship. I think that's important. And sort of see the kind of mental approach that it takes to really solving some really fundamental worldwide problems that as you mentioned, these 4 categories of people are trying to help people, and you're just really putting gasoline on the fire of support for that. And it's really inspirational, and I appreciate you for your time today.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. It's been a pleasure being on this, and I hope that the listeners get some value out of listening to this.
And I'll put show notes. I'll put links for everybody to see Akshay's framework on LinkedIn. Is that the best place where they can link up with you? Okay.
That would be a great starting point. We'll have more articles in other places, but definitely right now, the best place to start is in a very digestible format is going to be on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And you've had a lot of engagement there, like tons of comments, and it'd be fun for listeners to go check you out. All right, Akshay, thanks you for your time today.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.